Hello, everyone. This is Akachi, and welcome to the second episode of Akachi's Perspectives. I hope this sounds a lot clearer than that of my first episode. I just got a mic, and I think it sounds crispier, and I feel very fancy and very proud of myself for doing something that's worth it. Today we are going to be talking about the any value mindset. So I was reading this article a few weeks ago and it talked about how a lot of times, especially in 2019, when everyone wants to get the most out of their lives and we're trying to be productive and there's a lot of hustle porn out there, you can get tricked in the sense that I don't know who said this famous quote, but the easiest person to deceive is yourself. And with any value mindset, a lot of times we end up filling our calendars, our to-do list with things that, to be honest, if we took a step back and looked at it really closely, we'd see that they didn't matter in the long run. And I found this really true and really important. So it's like the question you should be asking is, I don't know if you do this already. If you don't, I would say you should. But when the night before you put together your list of what you want to get through the next day, I want you to also step back and look at that list and think to yourself, have I applied the any value mindset here? If you can highlight anywhere you've put in the any value mindset, then take it out. What I'm trying to say is, a lot of times we want to get as much as possible done. So we want to be very efficient, but are we effective? Any value mindset makes you think, if you do 5 things in 1 hour, oh my God, you've had a great hour, you've been super productive. But it's the value of those 5 things. Are they all important? Should you have done 5 things? Or actually, maybe you should have done two and the other three probably shouldn't have been done or didn't really benefit you. So make sure you're not having an any value mindset. Make sure you're having a high value mindset. Make sure you're doing only things that are moving you towards your goal. And in typical fashion, I'm going to give you a few examples. So the first example is me. I love listening to podcasts, especially video podcasts on YouTube. I love listening to podcasts. Some podcasts I listen to are regarding health. Some are regarding consumerism. So like debt and materialism and minimalism. Some that I listen to are regarding business and startups. Basically all things that I like. But sometimes you have to stop and ask yourself, like, are these all helpful? Because when you're listening to podcasts, you tell yourself you're educating yourself, but sometimes it can be a bit more than that. Sometimes you can switch into any value mindset where you actually have more important things to do, but your favorite podcaster has just released a new episode and you're like, oh my God, I need to listen. You then have to ask yourself, am I actually listening to this for learning and education purposes? Or actually, is it just entertainment at this point? Especially because if you look at, let's say, 20 podcasts that your favorite podcaster has released, chances are many of them are actually saying the same thing. Like, it's not exactly the same podcast, but they're talking about similar topics. So you have to maybe set a goal for yourself. Tell yourself that this week, all in all, I don't want to watch more than 10 podcast episodes and I don't want to watch less than 5. So just like give yourself a specific range. That way you don't let it spiral out of control. Because a lot of times, again, we tell ourselves we want to listen to podcasts, they're educative, and etc. But it just moves into that entertainment field, especially when you've become quite a fan of the person you're watching. And sometimes we see it again in, let's say you actually went to watch a video and it was quite meant to be educative, but then you see the kind of funny comments that people put on that person's YouTube video, and it's quite interesting. So you start to go through the other videos as well, and you're getting into that team spirit with the other fans, and it just slips. Like you actually went there to learn something. Next thing you know, you're there for entertainment purposes, and things have switched. It's almost like being in class and you go to class to learn, and let's say you're like 8 years old and you go to class to learn, and yeah, you're doing your work and everything, but then the teacher leaves the class and it gets really loud, it gets really noisy, people start to play. It's not because you guys have any bad intention. It's just because the teacher who was there to moderate you has left, and so he's not giving you the space and the chance to just meet up your friends, just pull pranks on people. In our lives, that teacher is self-control. Self-control is something I love and hate. I hate it because in so many parts of my life I actually don't have self-control, aka like in things that like food. I eat everything and anything, and most of what I eat isn't even healthy, even though I know better. So think about it. Think about you're in a classroom and there's a teacher there. You would be very disciplined. If your teacher leaves, you might start to like hang out with your friends and forget the task at hand. Think about your self-control, your will, your discipline, being that teacher when you're actually going to this sources of media and trying to learn things. For example, I like to read Financial Times, and the reason why for me it doesn't ever sleep into entertainment is because a lot of stories in the Financial Times are actually very serious. Like they're talking about currency, they're talking about like companies, they're talking about different things that are quite important affecting the world economy. So it's harder for me to slip into entertainment mood. Whereas you're on YouTube, you're watching podcasts, next thing you know, you've wasted like 3 hours and you haven't achieved anything. So be very careful when it comes to filling your time up with things that look like education, but actually it's like infotainment, basically. Another example I want to give is recently I've decided to start like, making the most of my time in London. Like, yes, I live here, but there's so many events going on around that you can meet fellow business people, and I don't even go for them. So when I was a student, I used to go for these events all the time, especially when they had to do with like especially when they were like academic events like conferences, etc. And I actually met some pretty cool friends that way, and I met some contacts, etc. But I realized once I started working, I stopped doing this, and I recently have been like, let me start again. So I went to one last week on a Sunday actually, and it was like a 2-hour session on public speaking. I don't have any plans to be public speaking anytime soon, but I said let me go. It sounds like a great skill. I'll learn something anyway. At the end of the 2 hours, I was on my way home and I was thinking to myself, what exactly did I learn? Now, you know what? That doesn't really say a lot about, it doesn't say, it's I'm not talking about all seminars, but this one particularly wasn't that great. And I remember thinking to myself, if I had just sat home and dedicated that 2 hours to actually going online and Googling public speaking tips, public speaking skills, maybe read a few blog entries, a few news stories on public speaking, maybe I would have learned a lot more. So you have to be careful with that kind of thing as well. Or like, yeah, let's say you're going for a networking event and you tell yourself it's because you want to grow your network. Good. But make sure you're actively growing your network. Make sure you're not just going there, talking to people, getting business cards, and then never following up. Because then you haven't actually derived any value from spending your time at that event. And I think that's also another thing to point out, that you can actually start something with the intention of making it high value, and then it turns out to be any value / no value. It's kind of the thing with the podcast. You go online and you want to learn something informative, and then it slips into entertainment. It can also happen in other areas of our life, where the intention is set, but the action, the delivery, the execution is really poor. And then in hindsight, it didn't actually deliver any value. Okay, another one is, actually this is still related to news, but be very picky with the kind of content you read. Because we're human beings, we tend to read the same thing over and over again and we don't even know. It's just like YouTube. You watch a few videos and then for future purposes, every single video that the site suggests to you will be relating to the topics of those videos you watched. And it's quite scary because it means that you're not actually learning new things. You're just watching things that reinforce what you already knew or what you're already interested in. And that's quite dangerous. So I don't really know how to solve the YouTube problem, because a lot of times we just get suggested loads of new material that is already in our interest. So when I mean in our interest, like it's already in our area of interest. So we're human beings. We'll just watch them or listen to them, but start to be more selective in the news you read. I've recently gotten a Medium subscription. And sorry for the sniffing. Oh my gosh, I have a cold. Bite me. Basically, I got a Medium subscription recently, and I started to notice that all the stories I was reading were again things that were already in my area of interest, topics I already was interested in. And I didn't like this. I didn't like the fact that in a way I'm kind of like listening to the same things on YouTube. Obviously they're entertaining. Like reading the same things on Medium, and sometimes you can feel like, oh my god, I don't really have this huge view of the world because, you know, I'm so into business and entrepreneurship and health and fitness and consumerism and like personal finance, and you want to learn something like really, really, really random, like how do rabbits give birth to babies in cold countries. Okay, that is a very weird example, because once I started saying that sentence, I realized I didn't actually have anything in mind to complete it. But basically, the idea is start to be more picky with the kind of news you read, and if possible, tell yourself that you want it to be very different to what you already know. So now when I go on Medium, I try to read either articles on topics I know nothing about so that I'm actually getting wiser, or technical things. So for example, how do you make your podcast better? Which is quite interesting for me because, you know, I've just started this podcast, so it's actually technical knowledge that I did know about. It can be knowledge on a skill like sales or marketing. It can be knowledge on accounting, but basically be more intentional with the kind of news you consume. Yes, some news should, you know, align with your interests. Yes, some news should just be updating you on the world, but some other news, like, making efforts to make sure it's something you already don't know. Because once you learn something you didn't know before, that is high value. Like, it's not any value, it's not rubbish value. It's actually high value because you're now wiser in that area. Because you didn't know anything about it before. So that's an easy one. Like, anytime you go on your favorite news sites, instead of clicking on stories that you already know you're interested in, click on one that you didn't know you had an interest in before you clicked on it. Click on it and read it. You'll learn something new, and that is also always a good way to get high value out of the information you're consuming. Again, sorry for the sniffing. I've gotten the cold. So it's been an interesting few days here in London. It should be summer. It's mid-June, but it's been very rainy over the past few days. I kind of like rainy weather, and so I've been out a lot, just like walking. I know that sounds weird, but I remember telling my friends I like it when it's rainy. I was telling them this last week, and now I have a cold, so kind of like jokes on me because I kind of asked for it, didn't I? Anyway, final example of avoiding the any value mindset. Now, this one is very tricky because sometimes you don't know until it's done. And it has to do with the very question of why. Why am I doing this? Another way to ask this question is, what would the best case scenario of this look like? And would I be excited as hell to be in that position? For example, you can meet with your friend and say you want to start an e-commerce idea. And at the beginning, it's exciting. Not only is it exciting, but it's also It's also fearful because you don't know if it's actually going to work out or not. So you don't really have to imagine what would this look like when it's like $1 billion company, because at that moment you have more pressing worries, like how do we create a mock-up of the site? What is our sales funnel gonna look like? How do we market? How do we test the product ideas? etc, etc. But it's very important that when you set big dreams, after a while you step back. Even if it's a few weeks into that dream, you step back and think, if this thing were to succeed, best case scenario, would I really, really, really like it? And sometimes you can find a different answer than what you expected. So, for example, let's say I know someone and that person wanted to start like a business that was very, that had a lot to do with like relationship building, and connecting different parties of a commercial transaction together. And then when they sat down to think about best case scenario, they realized they didn't actually want that business at all, because they didn't want something that was so personal. They'd rather, go after a business model that was a lot more digital, that they could unplug from totally and operations will still continue. Like, it wouldn't be dependent on them being at their desk or meeting people actively face to face. And it's quite interesting because if they didn't imagine best case scenario, they wouldn't have known that they wouldn't actually like the best case if and when the best case ever happened. You can also think it in terms of things like, so let's say you're starting an e-commerce product, and yes, I'm aware I'm using a lot of e-commerce ideas. You can think, oh, you just want to find something that sells well and then go after it. But you have to think, okay, well, let's say this thing sold excellently well. How would that look? And then you can find yourself saying things like, oh my God, like if this worked, I don't think I would actually be excited about it. Not because it works, but because I don't actually like the product itself. Like, I think it would sell, but I don't actually like the product. And again, it saves you a lot of pain down the line. Or else you get to the other end of the scale, which is the success, and then you'll ask yourself, why doesn't this feel great? So that's something you need to think about. Or if you find yourself writing a book, tell yourself, what would the best case scenario look like? How happy would I be if I wrote this book, published this book, and it hit 500K in sales in the first year, and I mean 500,000 copies? How would I feel? You could actually find out that it doesn't even excite you, because yeah, you want to write, but do you want to write? Like, I hope you understand me. Basically, I'm just saying that when it's time to set big goals, a lot of times, because we're so unsure of ever achieving those goals, we tend to think worst case scenario. What would worst case scenario be? And it's quite useful to think worst case scenario, because it helps you arm yourself. Because once you think about the worst case scenario, you write them down, it helps you move forward, because you already know what worst case scenario is and you're fine with it. However, I think we also need to start thinking best case scenario, because best case scenario will let us know if we actually truly do have a why. That's WHY. If we actually do have a why to what we're doing in the first place. Because there's a lot of noise out there, especially if you want to start something new and on your own. It's really hard nowadays to actually know what's your own idea, or what's something that you think is your idea, but it's actually not your idea. It's just in your head, because a lot of times in the past couple of years, you've read a lot of news on it, you've become very knowledgeable on it, everyone's talking about it, and it actually sounds exciting. So it's really hard to differentiate people's ideas from your ideas nowadays. And I think a lot of times thinking about best case scenario is quite important, because then you won't put so much effort into something that down the line you'd look back on and be like, wow, I don't actually know what value I was providing to either myself or anyone, and I've just wasted a bunch of time. So that's today's episode, tackling any value mindset. I think it's very important for all of us to just be aware of this on a very, very daily basis. I think it helps the most. And one tip before I go, actually, it might be good. And when I say it might be good, it will be good to get an accountability partner. Someone who you can say, okay, let's just do this together for a month. Every single day, I'll tell you everything I did. Because guess what? If your accountability partner is a good accountability partner, and that can be a good friend who is not afraid of telling you the harsh truths, they will let you know what things on that list of the things you did that day were actually any value and not high value. When you say things like, oh, I spent 2 hours watching the news, but it was very informative, they'll call you out and tell you, okay, tell me the 5 things you learned in that news today that you didn't know before, or you think will help your tasks or your achievements or things like that. It's very important that you have someone who's not afraid to call you out on your bullshit, and then you will start to know really, really clearly how much of an any value mindset you have, and then you can start working towards it gradually and start focusing on high value things in your life. So this has been quite a long podcast. I've been trying to, actually that's not true. I've not been trying to, because I only have one episode at the moment. But basically, I will try to be keeping this episode to about 15 minutes. This is run to about 20 minutes. So hope you are not sick of my voice at this time. However, it's not about being sick of my voice or about being in love with my voice. It's about what have you learned. And today, I hope you've learned that you should try and minimize any value mindset activities that you're doing on a daily basis. Thank you. Bye bye.